I've spent most of my life in southern Louisiana, and if there's one thing you learn growing up here, it's to respect the swamp. It looks peaceful at night when the water's still and the moon's catching on the surface, but I've learned there's always something underneath. I've seen gators big as boats, snakes that could drop out of the trees without warning, even the occasional bobcat staring at you from the bank. But I'll tell you now, none of those things come close to what me and my buddy saw that night. It was late summer, with thick air that sticks to your skin, the kind of night when even the cicadas seem too tired to scream. My friend Ray and I took his John boat out, just like we'd done 100 times before. He liked to gator watch when the weather was calm. It sounds strange, but you shine a spotlight out across the water, and you can pick up the red glow of their eyes, like little embers floating in the dark. It's not hunting, no guns, nothing illegal. Just a way to pass the time, watch nature and swap stories where nobody can bother you. Usually gators don't care. They'll sit half submerged, barely moving, just blinking at the light. But that night, something different was going on. We'd cut the motor and were drifting quiet when I noticed the first one. A decent-sized gator, maybe 8 feet, sitting off to our right. Instead of staying still, it whipped its tail and disappeared beneath the water. A couple minutes later, another pair of eyes vanished, then another. One by one, they started dipping under, swimming off like they wanted nothing to do with us. That might not sound strange, but it set both of us on edge. Gators are territorial. They don't usually scatter like minnows. Something spooked them, Ray muttered. His voice was low, almost like he didn't want the swamp to hear. I was about to answer when we heard it, a splash, but not like a gator sliding in. This was heavy and sharp, like something big breaking the surface. It came from behind us, out toward the wider channel. We both turned, spotlight sweeping, but all we caught was the rippling water. We sat still, waiting. A couple minutes passed. All was quiet except for the slap of mosquitoes on our necks. Then I saw it, movement under the water, fast, cutting a straight line toward us. My first thought was a big gator, but the way it moved was different. It was too smooth and direct. Ray swung the light onto it, but the second the beam hit, the shape dove deep and was gone in an instant. Now the swamp was dead silent. No frogs, no nightbirds, no gators. Just us, sitting in a boat that suddenly felt too small. After a while, Ray said, "Let's head back." He got no argument from me. He started the motor and we kept it slow, skimming toward the bayou mouth. I tried to keep my eyes forward, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was pacing us under the water. Every little ripple set me on edge. We were maybe 15 minutes from the launch when I saw it. Off to the left, near the shoreline, something was climbing out of the water. At first I thought it was a man, 2 legs, tall, shoulders hunched as it pushed itself up. But then the tail came out, long and thick, dragging behind it like a gator's. I grabbed Ray's arm so hard he cursed, and I pointed. The spotlight hit it just as it turned toward us. I don't know how to describe the skin, but when I close my eyes I can still see it, and it still makes my skin crawl. It wasn't smooth like a gator's hide, and it wasn't exactly scales either, more like rough, pebbled patches that caught the light. It stood upright, chest narrow, arms long, and the face. God, I wish I could forget the face. The shape was human, sure, but all messed up. The mouth was too wide, lips too thin like they weren't meant to be there. The eyes glared back at us, and the reflection wasn't like an animal's. It wasn't red or green. It was white, pale and sharp, like headlights staring us down. The moment it realized we'd seen it, It jerked its head and bolted, crashing into the weeds at the shoreline. The tail whipped behind it, heavy enough to bend reeds as it disappeared. Ray didn't wait for me to say anything. He opened up the throttle. The boat jumped forward, engine whining. My heart was pounding, but I kept looking back, terrified it would appear again. And it did. A sound like the swamp exploding. Another massive splash came from behind us. I twisted around and my stomach dropped. It was in the water, not 30 yards back, cutting toward us like a damn torpedo. All I could see was the head and shoulders, arms pulling through the water faster than any person could swim. The tail flicked up behind it, driving it forward. "Go, go, go," I screamed, though Ray already had the boat wide open. The John boat rattled against the chop, water spraying up over the bow. I clung to the seat, certain we were seconds away from getting pulled under. I risked another glance back. It was closer. The spotlight beam shook in my hand, but I caught its face again, breaking through the water with this horrible focus, eyes fixed on us like we were the only thing in the world it wanted. Then we hit the tree line, the narrow part of the swamp where branches dip low and roots stick up like teeth. Ray didn't slow down. He zigzagged through, and I swear it's a miracle we didn't crash into a cypress trunk. Somewhere in that chaos, I looked back again, and it was gone. No more ripples, no eyes, nothing. Just black water closing over itself. We didn't say a word the rest of the way. We pulled the boat out, loaded it up, and drove in silence. By the time we hit the highway, both of us were shaking, drenched in sweat. Ray lit a cigarette with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. "What the hell was that?" he finally whispered. I didn't have an answer, and I still don't. All I know is whatever it was fast enough and strong enough that if it wanted us, we wouldn't have stood a chance. That night, the swamp wasn't ours. It belonged to something else. Something I hope I never see again. My boyfriend Jake and I were hiking Mount Monadnock in New Hampshire last October. It was one of those perfect fall days where the leaves were at peak color and the air had that crisp bite that makes you feel alive. We'd driven up from Boston early that morning, hoping to beat the crowds and get some good photos of the foliage. The trail was busier than we expected for a Tuesday, but nothing too crazy. Families with kids, and a few serious hikers with their fancy gear, so the usual mix you see on popular mountains. We were about 2 hours in, taking our time and stopping frequently to admire the view, when Jake pointed to something off the trail. "Look at that guy," he said, nodding toward a figure maybe 50 yards away through the trees. I followed his gaze and saw what looked like a man moving between the birches and maples. He was definitely human-shaped, but something about the way he moved, well, it didn't seem right. Instead of walking normally, he seemed to be going from tree to tree in this weird lurching way. Not like he was hiding exactly, because we could see him clear as day, but more like he was using the trees for support or guidance. "Maybe he's lost," I suggested. But being so close to the trail, that didn't seem likely. Also, lost people don't usually move with a purpose, even if their movements look strange. Jake shrugged. Could be, or maybe he's just doing his own thing. Some people are weird about staying on trails. We watched for another minute, but the figure disappeared deeper into the woods. We didn't think much more on it and kept hiking. The views from the upper sections of the Monadnock are incredible, and I was busy taking photos and enjoying the day. About an hour later, we hit a section where the trail winds through some really dense forest. The canopy was thick enough that it felt like walking through a tunnel, with just patches of that brilliant October light filtering through. It was quieter here too, muffled by all the trees. That's when we heard it. At first, it sounded like an animal bleating. You know that sound goats make? Kind of like a drawn-out ma, but more guttural. Jake and I both stopped and listened. Probably just some kids messing around, Jake said. But then the sound changed. It was subtle at first, like the bleating was trying to form words. And then, clear as anything, we heard someone calling for help. "Help, please, I'm hurt." The voice was coming from somewhere off the trail, deeper in the woods. It sounded like a man, maybe middle-aged, and there was real distress in it. "We should check it out," Jake said immediately, already stepping off the trail toward the voice. I felt my stomach tighten. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, though I couldn't put my finger on exactly what. "Jake, I don't know. Maybe we should get other hikers or call for some help instead." "Come on, Sarah. If someone's hurt, we can't just leave them." He was already pushing through the underbrush, following the voice. I followed reluctantly. The calls for help continued, always seeming to come from just a little further ahead. "Over here. Please, I can't move." We must have gone a couple 100 yards off the trail, scrambling over fallen logs and pushing through thick patches of oak scrub. I kept looking back, trying to keep track of where we'd come from, but the forest all looked the same. "Jake, this is too far," I said. "We're gonna get lost ourselves." "Just a little further," he called back. "The voice is coming from right up ahead." That's when I suggested we spread out a bit, but stay within sight of each other. Maybe we could cover more ground that way. Jake moved off to the left, while I angled right, both of us still following the intermittent calls for help. I was scanning the ground and looking for any sign of an injured person, when movement above caught my eye. I looked up into the branches of a large maple tree, maybe 20 feet away. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. There was definitely something up there, something that looked partially human. It had the torso and arms of a person, but the legs were all wrong. They were bent backward at the knees, covered in dark fur, and ended in what looked like hooves. The thing was crouched on a thick branch, perfectly balanced in a way that no human could manage. It was watching Jake. I stood there for what felt like forever, just staring at this thing in the tree. It had its head turned toward where Jake was crashing through the brush, following the voice that was still calling for help. The same voice that I now realized was coming from this creature. "Help me, I'm over here," it called out. And I watched its mouth move as it made the sounds. But there was something wrong with the way the words formed, like it was imitating human speech rather than actually speaking. I found my voice. "Jake," I hissed as loudly as I dared. "Jake, get over here." The thing's head snapped toward me, and I got a good look at its face for the first time. It was mostly human, but the eyes were wrong. Too wide set, with horizontal pupils like a goat's. When it realized I was looking directly at it, its expression changed from focused hunting to something like surprise, or maybe annoyance. Jake came crashing back through the brush. "What is it? Did you find him?" "Look up there," I said, pointing at the tree. But by the time Jake looked up, the thing was already moving. It leaped down and was running off with impossible agility, making barely any sound despite its size. Within seconds, it had disappeared into the deeper parts of the forest, leaving just the faint rustle of leaves in its wake. "I don't see anything," Jake said, looking confused. I tried to explain what I'd seen, but even as I said it, I didn't believe it myself. A man with goat legs sitting in a tree, mimicking human voices, sounded completely bonkers. Jake looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Maybe it was just shadows and leaves," he suggested gently. "You know how your eyes can play tricks in this kind of light." But I knew what I'd seen, and more importantly, I knew that the calls for help had stopped completely the moment the thing realized it had been spotted. We made our way back to the trail, which took longer than expected because we gotten turned around. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something following us. But the forest was quiet except for normal wood sounds, birds, squirrels, and the wind in the branches. We didn't talk much for the rest of the hike. Jake was clearly skeptical about what I'd described, and I didn't blame him. If someone had told me the same story a week ago, I probably would have laughed. But I keep thinking about it, especially at night. The way it was calling for help, how crazy it looked. I have some theories on what it was doing, and none of them are particularly comforting. Something that can mimic human speech and deliberately lures people away from safe areas. That's predatory behavior. I don't know if it was planning to hurt Jake directly, or just get him lost. But either way, I'm glad I spotted it when I did. We haven't been back to Monadnock. Jake wants to go again next weekend, but I keep making excuses. Maybe next year, I tell him. Maybe when I can stop hearing that fake human voice calling for help in my dreams. I've been a nature photographer for over a decade, and for me, there's nothing like finding untouched territory. I spend weekends chasing light, shadows, reflections, anything that feels raw and wild. One morning, I was paddling a small tributary off the Pawtucket River, just south of the main branch, looking for something I had never seen before. I had a light kayak, a decent camera, and a sense that this back channel, narrow and winding as it was, might hide a scene no one else had ever captured. The first few bends were quiet. The water was still and the sky reflected in it like glass. Herons flitted across the reeds, dragonflies zipped past, and I was content, drifting slowly. The camera clicked steadily, catching the play of morning sun through the cypress trees and the occasional snaggle of wildflower growing from the water's edge. The deeper I went, the more narrow the channel became, and the more the swamp seemed to swallow me. It wasn't dangerous, not really. It was just isolated. But the isolation was inspiring. Each bend revealed the scene better than the last. A fallen log draped in moss, sunlight spilling through a gap in the canopy, a reflection of trees so perfect it seemed unreal. I kept going. One bend led to another, and soon I was far from the launch point, further than I'd ever been. The water narrowed into a ribbon overhung with trees, reeds brushing my shoulders as I paddled. Around mid-afternoon, I started hearing sounds I couldn't place. A splash here, a subtle rustle there. Maybe a low, croaking hiss I could have convinced myself was a frog or a bird. I shrugged it off. It was the swamp. It always has sounds you can't name. Then I noticed the trees. Some had markings, deep scratches in the bark, patterns I couldn't immediately identify. Nothing recent, I thought, but definitely not natural. I paused, leaned over to inspect one, fingers tracing the grooves. They weren't claw marks from a deer or a beaver's teeth. I got a little uneasy, but rationalized it. I was near DC, not some podunk swamp in the middle of nowhere. People hike, hunters pass through, and somehow this was probably just old logging marks or prank graffiti. Still, I kept the feeling tucked in the back of my mind and pressed on. By late afternoon, shadows were lengthening, and the air was cooling. I checked my watch and realized I should probably turn back. The back channel was beautiful, but it was easy to get lost. Then I saw it, a small patch of dry land jutting up from the water, almost like an island, overgrown but walkable. On top of it, a cluster of twisted roots, moss-covered stumps, and a fallen branch formed a composition that practically screamed, "Photograph me." I couldn't resist. I landed the kayak, hauled it a few feet up, and started carefully stepping into the weeds. My camera was ready, hands adjusting the lens, framing the scene. That's when I noticed movement. At first I thought it was another bird, or maybe a deer slipping through the underbrush. Then it stepped fully into the clearing, and my stomach dropped. It was, well, hard to describe. About 6 or 7 feet tall, upright on 2 legs, with long arms that extended and hands that looked strong, but not entirely human. Its skin caught the dappled sunlight. It looked rough, but shiny at the same time, like an insect shell, but thin enough to hint at a humanoid shape beneath it. The face, well, it had eyes that were too big, and those as well reminded me of a bug, but they had a shape that was vaguely human, yet stretched in ways that didn't make sense. It froze when it saw me, head tilting slightly, watching. I couldn't bring myself to raise the camera. I didn't even want to breathe. I froze for a second, then decided to sneak away, quietly, back to the kayak. Sweat was dripping in my eyes, but not from the humidity, and my mouth was dry. I tried to move slowly, step by step, keeping my gaze fixed on the clearing. My fingers trembled as I reached the kayak, hauled myself in, and pushed off. That's when it moved. Crash of branches behind me made me spin around. The thing was coming out of the undergrowth, fast. The reeds and saplings snapped and bent, and for a moment, I thought it might actually run me down. I had no plan, no weapon, nothing but adrenaline and instinct. I started yelling, shouting, screaming, flailing my arms like a maniac, anything to make it hesitate. Surprisingly, it worked. For a second, I thought it might charge, but then I could hear the undergrowth give way as it retreated, a low, wet thud with each step, slipping back into the trees. I didn't wait to see more. I paddled hard, not stopping until I reached the wider main branch of the river. I was shaking, soaked in sweat, and heart still hammering. I paddled a little further downstream when another kayaker appeared. He called out, asking if I was all right. My brain scrambled. "Oh yeah, just wildlife got loud," I mumbled. "Snapped a branch or something." He nodded and paddled on. I stayed in the middle of the river, eyes darting into the undergrowth, but the channel was empty. No sign of the creature on the shore. No sounds coming from the brush. Nothing except the water moving gently past my hull. I paddled the rest of the way back in silence. My mind kept replaying it. The mottled skin, the strange humanoid shape, the way it watched me with those eyes. I still don't know what it was. Maybe some undiscovered predator, or just my imagination from being out and isolated. I don't care. I've never gone back to that tributary again. This happened back in 2019, when I was a junior in high school. I grew up in Carmel, so Big Sur was basically our backyard. My buddies Tyler and Marcus and I used to drive down Highway 1 all the time, looking for places to explore that tourists didn't know about. We'd been checking out sea caves for most of that summer, timing our visits with the low tide so we could get into spots that were normally underwater. We'd already hit most of the known caves around Midway Falls, and some of the smaller ones near Partington Cove. Tyler's older brother had told us about this one spot, about 3 miles south of Midway Falls, tucked into a little inlet that you couldn't see from the highway. You had to scramble down the sketchy cliff path, and then wait for the tide to drop enough to wade around the rocks. The first time we found it was in late July. It was bigger than the other caves we'd explored, going back maybe 50 yards into the cliff face. The entrance was wide enough for all 3 of us to walk side by side, but it narrowed as you went deeper. What hit me right away was the smell. All the other sea caves had that typical ocean smell. Salt water, seaweed, maybe some dead fish if you were unlucky. This one smelled different. It was pretty wild, almost like something had been rotting in there for a while. Marcus made some joke about it smelling like Tyler's gym socks, but even he looked a little grossed out. We almost turned back, but Tyler spotted some really cool tide pools along the sides of the cave, and we ended up spending a couple hours there checking those out. Found some sea anemones I'd never seen before, bright purple ones, and shells that looked almost tropical. We went back 3 more times over the next few weeks. The smell never got better, but we got used to it, and the tide pools were honestly some of the best we'd found anywhere along that stretch of coast. We always made sure to keep track of the time though. Getting caught in there when the tide came in was not something any of us wanted to experience. It was on our 4th trip, early August, that things got weird. The tide was lower than usual, and we were able to get further back into the cave than we managed before. The floor rose up in the back section, creating this dry ledge, maybe 8 feet above the water level. We'd brought headlamps this time because the natural light didn't reach that far back. Tyler climbed up first, then helped Marcus and me. The ledge was maybe 15 feet wide and went back another 20 feet or so into the darkness. That's when I noticed the droppings scattered around the floor. They were dark, about the size of golf balls, and definitely not from seagulls or any other bird I knew. Too big for bats and wrong shape for seals. "What do you think made these?" Marcus asked, poking at one with his shoe. Tyler shrugged. "Maybe some kind of otter or something." I wasn't convinced, but I didn't have a better explanation. We were examining the droppings when I switched on my headlamp to get a better look. The moment the beam cut through the darkness, we heard the sound from deeper in the cave. It was like a scream, but not quite human. High-pitched and raspy, lasting maybe 3 seconds before it cut off. All 3 of us froze. "Very funny," Tyler said, looking at Marcus and me. "Which one of you did that?" "Wasn't me," Marcus said immediately. "Me neither," I said, though I was already wondering if one of them was messing with us. We stood there for a minute, listening, but didn't hear anything else. Tyler made some comment about echo effects in caves, and we kept exploring. The ledge continued back into what felt like a separate chamber, smaller and more cramped than the front section. That's when we started hearing movement. It was subtle at first, just little sounds like something shifting around in the darkness ahead of us. Could have been water dripping or rock settling, but it had a rhythm to it that seemed too regular to be random. "I think we should head back," Marcus said. He'd been the most nervous about the whole thing from the start. "Come on, we're finally getting somewhere interesting," Tyler argued. "Let's just see what's back there." I was torn. A bit of me wanted to know what was making those sounds, but another bit was starting to feel like we were somewhere we shouldn't be. The smell was stronger back here too. That same rotting funk, but more concentrated. Tyler went out, like he usually did. We kept moving forward, our headlamp beams sweeping back and forth across the cave walls. The ceiling was getting lower, forcing us to duck down as we walked. The sounds were getting clearer now. Definitely movement, something sizable shifting around in the darkness ahead of us. It wasn't trying to be quiet, whatever it was. I was in front when my headlamp beam swept across something that made me stop dead in my tracks. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. There was something standing in the back of the chamber, maybe 30 feet away. It was roughly the size and shape of a person, but kind of wrong in ways I couldn't immediately identify. It was standing upright on 2 legs, but right away things stuck out that weren't right. It was too thin and angular. The arms seemed too long, and there was something strange about the way they connected to the body. "Do you guys see that?" I whispered. Tyler and Marcus moved up behind me, their headlamps joining mine to light up the figure. That's when it moved. The thing let out another one of those screams, louder this time and more agitated. As it did, it spread its arms wide, and I could see what had looked wrong about them. There were flaps of skin or webbing stretched from its arms down to its side, like a bat's wing structure but on something human-sized. For a split second, I thought it was going to try and fly at us. Instead, it spun around and dove headfirst into a pool of water at the back of the chamber that I hadn't even noticed in the darkness. The splash was huge, and then it was gone. I ran to the edge where it had jumped and looked over. I could hear it moving through the water, and then I saw it swimming away from us faster than anything I'd ever seen. The sound faded quickly, like it had found some underwater passage that led back out to the ocean. The three of us stood there in complete silence for like 5 minutes. Our headlamp beams played across the empty water where the thing had disappeared. "What the hell was that?" Marcus finally said. None of us had an answer. Tyler, who usually had something to say about everything, was completely quiet. I kept replaying what I'd seen in my head, but it didn't make any more sense the second or third time. We didn't stick around to investigate further. The whole encounter had lasted maybe 2 minutes, but it felt like we'd been in there for hours. We scrambled back out of the cave as fast as we could manage, not really talking until we were back up on the cliff path. Even then, we didn't say much. There was nothing really to say. We'd all seen the same thing, but none of us could explain what it was. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard of. Too big to be a bat, too weird to be a human. But it moved like it was perfectly comfortable both on land and in the water. We never went back to that cave. Tyler suggested it a couple times later that summer, but Marcus and I always found reasons to explore somewhere else instead. I think we were all a little spooked, even if none of us wanted to admit it. I still don't know what we saw that day. I've looked up weird marine animals, coastal wildlife, even tried researching local legends, but nothing matches what was in that cave. Sometimes I wonder if it's still there, or if it moved on to somewhere else. Either way, I'm not planning to find out. You have been watching Noir, a Radion production brought to you by Trapper Dan, the finest in canned survival food.